So about 8 or, well, almost 8 years ago, I made a video saying that the Parker Sonnet was easily my favourite fountain pen. And you know, back then, that probably wasn't a huge, or at least a hugely complicated decision, because I owned about 10 different fountain pens, and that was easily the most expensive. So there you go, Parker Sonnet, top 10 fountain pen. Since then, I've probably used about 150 different fountain pens, so I guess the real question is, do I still believe that the Parker Sonnet is still one of the greatest fountain pens that I currently own? Now, I think the term underrated gets thrown around quite a lot these days, but if there was one fountain pen that actually deserves the term underrated, it's got to be the Parker Sonnet. Even after all these years of using different fountain pens, I still hold it as being the greatest or one of the greatest fountain pens that I own. And on top of that, talk to anyone else who has a Parker Sonnet, they're bound to say something very similar, in that it's a fantastic writer and also a very comfortable writer. Yet if you go to the fountain pen forums, Reddit, or even YouTube, it's almost like this fountain pen doesn't exist. I mean, it'll pop up every now and then, but on the whole, it really gets talked about. And that's not to say that this isn't a great selling pen. I'd probably wager that it's probably one of the greatest selling fountain pens in the modern day. It's just that the people that tend to buy it aren't generally people who are fountain pen enthusiasts. The people who tend to be buying Parker Sonnets are people who are going to be using this pen as a gift. And in the same way that people who get this fountain pen are generally people who receive it as a gift. That's the way that Parker tends to market this pen, and that is generally the way that this fountain pen is sold. And in fact, that's how I came to own this one. My grandfather gave it to me as a Christmas gift about a decade ago. And I'm really glad that he did, because it's a great fountain pen. And even outside of my example, I think it's clear that Parker make a huge effort to sell these pens in big department stores, aiming it towards people who are looking for, gifts for people, rather than aiming it at proper pen enthusiasts. Not that you can't buy them on proper pen websites, it's just not their focus. So that's going to be one reason why you're not going to see this pen mentioned as much in the fountain pen community. And Parker themselves don't do themselves any favour because, at least from what I've heard, their quality control has seemed to fall off the cliff, at least in recent years. Although I do think all of this does speak to the wider topic of Parker's decline as a brand. Because whilst it's not everything, I do think a pen's history, or at least the history of the brand, is something that I'm at least thinking about when I'm using a fountain pen. If it really didn't matter, Montblanc wouldn't be able to charge $1,000 for a pen that realistically isn't worth $1,000. But even so, Montblanc does have a rich history, and you can easily point out a brand and say, that's a Montblanc, that's a famous fountain pen from France, and it has this history, it's been used by this president or this person here. The same thing could be said for Lamy, although it is a bit less prestigious, but you do know it's a famous German fountain pen brand. Parker, however, has a bit more of a checkered past, because obviously we all know that it's a famous American established fountain pen brand, but I believe in the 1980s, they moved their headquarters over to England. And at least when I got into using fountain pens, they marketed the fact that they had a royal warrant, and they supplied the Queen and other members of the royal family with, stationery. In fact, if you didn't know better, you might think that Parker, at least for a while, was an English company. They also made their fountain pens in France, this one included, but from what I understand, their entire production has now ceased in England, and it's now pretty much a French-based company. I'm not about to say that Parker is a French company or anything, but their history, and I guess their brand's pedigree, is a bit all over the place. And I've got to say, their modern lineup of pens is pretty disappointing to say the least. There's a few unimpressive cheap pens that are bested by pens from TWSBI, Pilot and Lamy. There's an overpriced Parker 51 which uses a nib from a much cheaper fountain pen, and you have the Duofold at the top. Now, I haven't used a Parker Duofold, but from what I hear, the vintage ones are a lot cheaper and are a lot better, and as a result, they tend to be the more sourced ones on the internet. Now, obviously the things that I've listed are just small things individually, but I think put all of them together and you have a fountain pen brand that is really going to be left behind by the people who really care about fountain pens in favour of other fountain pen brands. And I find that really unfortunate because it tends to drag down the Sonnet, which, as I said before, is easily one of the best fountain pens that you can buy on the market today, at least for everyday writing. So let's talk about the Parker Sonnet. This is Parker's medium to high-end fountain pen. I believe this starts at about $150 Australian, whereas the top tier fountain pen, which is the Duofold, starts at about $1,000. And whilst the duofold is more of a prestigious pen that you might want to be a bit careful about, the Parker Sonnet is easily one of those everyday carry workhorse fountain pens. These pens are designed to be tough, and there is none more tougher than the one that I have here. This is about as standard as you can get. This is the brushed stainless steel with the gold trim and the black resin section. And looking at the pen now, it almost looks as good as it did when I received this pen 9 years ago. Keep in mind that for 4 of those years, this was an everyday carry pen that I used during high school and university. And I can tell you, during those years, I was not as kind to my pens as I probably should have been. You know, I was chucking this pen in my backpack, I was chucking it in my pants pocket, in my blazer pocket, and, you know, I kept keys in there, I kept coins in there. A lot of fountain pens, you know, got scratched during those years, a lot of fountain pens got broken, but this one here, pretty much came out unscathed. There might be a few scratches or dings, but I think the only substantial wear is that a small amount of the gold plating has started to wear off. Although that'll happen on pretty much any fountain pen that you everyday carry for several years. With that said though, I do want to say that I know some people have had issues with the plating flaking off a little bit, especially when ink dries on the front band here, but that's not something that I've ever had a problem with. Now in terms of aesthetics, I think it's fair to say that it's a very understated, almost generic looking pen, which for an everyday carry pen isn't a bad thing. In fact, the best thing I can say about the aesthetics is that it's a very elegant looking pen. Now I certainly like that, but if that's not something that suits you, Parker sell this fountain pen in a million different variations. You can get different lacquers, different colours, different engravings on the barrel. I mean, you name it, and they've probably done it. And if you can't find a style that you like on Parker's website, go on eBay and take a look at some of the older Parker Sonnets, because they've done a lot of limited editions, and because of this, there are a million different listings on eBay. Plus, this fountain pen has been around since 1993, so finding used Parker Sonnets is not exactly that difficult. Plus, you'll be able to get them for less than the $150 that Parker is charging for a new one. I'm not saying that $150 is too much for this fountain pen, because given the amount of value and use that I've gotten from it, you know, $150 is definitely justified, but you can definitely get this for less than half of that. Just keep in mind that the brushed stainless steel version will probably hold up the best compared to anything that has any lacquering or engraving. And on top of that, be wary from any listings that are coming from China or any deals that are too good to be true, because the Parker Sonnet is easily one of the most faked fountain pens out there. And I've got to say, whoever's doing the fakes is doing a really good job, because they are almost indistinguishable to a Parker Sonnet unless you have a real one right next to it. So just be careful and stay away from those listings. Although at least from my experience looking for Parker Sonnet fakes, most of the ones that are produced are going to be faking the style that I have here, that being the brushed stainless steel and the gold trim. I don't think I've seen any fakes of the special edition fountain pens. Now, no matter what style of Parker Sonnet that you get, you're still going to be benefiting from the fantastic ergonomics of this fountain pen. You know, to this day, it is easily one of the most comfortable fountain pens that I've used. It's a slip cap, so there's no threads, and you'll be able to hold it pretty much wherever you want, using your preferred grip style. Now, the model that I have also has the black lacquered grip, which is probably the most common style that you'll get, although there are some Parker Sonnets that come with a stainless steel grip. Now, I haven't used one of those, but I gotta say the black lacquer is a fantastic grip, because one of the big pet peeves that I have when I have a lacquer grip is that there is a risk that it gets slippery over time from the oils building up. With the Parker Sonnet, I don't know exactly what lacquer they've used, but it's fantastic because you can use this for, you know, hours and hours and hours on end, and it's not going to get slippery at all. And if it matters to you, this fountain pen posts better than most fountain pens that I own. It posts securely and it's very well balanced. Unposted, it's about 13 grams, and posted, it's about 23. So whether you like a lighter or a heavier fountain pen, this is going to suit you really well. And the best thing is, even with it posted, it doesn't feel too back heavy. In fact, most of the weight is going to be sitting right here between my thumb and index finger, and at least to me, that is really comfortable. I don't generally tend to post fountain pens when I write with them these days, but writing with this fountain pen posted is very comfortable. Ergonomically, I'd say it's a very neutral fountain pen, but it does everything that it needs to do very well. And I should know, because this is the fountain pen that I trusted when I was doing my high school and some of my university exams. And I wouldn't use any fountain pen that I didn't think I'd be able to use for stretches of either 3 or 4 hours at a time, which is why I only used this fountain pen and my Pilot Prera. And I'm glad that I did, because there probably wasn't any other fountain pen, apart from maybe the TWSBI Eco, that I would trust to do the job. Although at the time, I didn't have a TWSBI Eco. The only thing that could make this fountain pen even better would be if I could eyedrop the fountain pen, because this is a very thirsty fountain pen, but obviously it's a steel barreled pen, and even though the barrel is made from stainless steel, the threads are made of plated steel, and I don't trust that for eyedropping. However, being steel threads, it means that we're going to be stuck with either cartridges, which if you choose to buy are actually quite expensive. I think these days they're about $2 a piece, and given that this is a very thirsty fountain pen, you'll be going through cartridges quite quickly. So I'd recommend that you use this fountain pen with a converter and using some bottled ink. Now Parker do sell 2 different types of converters. There's a screw-driven one and a plunger style one, which is the one that I have here, and having used both, I don't think there's a huge difference between whichever one that you use. Finally, let's talk about the star of the show, and that is going to be the nib. You know, even after all these years, having used so many different fountain pens, this is going to be one of the best nibs that I've used for everyday writing. Now this one here, at least specs wise, it's nothing special. It's just a gold plated stainless steel nib, although you can get them in 18 karat gold, and the people who use them swear by them. Although it will be a bit more expensive by about $100, and at least in my experience, having never used an 18 karat gold nib version, the stainless steel nib seems to behave very similarly to the 18 karat gold one, and the stainless steel nib is definitely adequate. Now this one here is a medium nib, and being a medium nib from a European brand, it tends to put down quite a wide line, and with it, it puts down a fair amount of ink. During high school, I was refilling this pen every day or second day, depending on how much writing I was doing. That is about twice as often as compared to my Pilot Prera. Outside of the ink consumption though, which isn't really a huge problem, there's about 5 different reasons why I would consider this to be one of my favourite nibs. Now the first reason is it is buttery smooth, and it doesn't have any sweet spots. You know, you can write with this pen on pretty much any angle, and you can tilt this fountain pen sort of off axis in a way that might upset other fountain pens, but this pen, it will continue to write, and it's going to be buttery smooth no matter which way you use it. The second reason why I love it is obviously the moderately wet feed, so it's able to keep up if you're doing fast writing, like I was doing in my exams, but it's not too wet that you're going to feather, you know, the living daylights out of the cheap paper, and it's not going to bleed through. The third reason why I love it is that it is a reliable fountain pen. Now obviously the modern pens, you know, the quality control is a bit more up in the air, but at least with this fountain pen, which was made about 10 years ago, it obviously had great quality control, and it was incredibly reliable. You know, these days, because I have dropped it a few times, it's not perfectly aligned, so it does skip a little bit, but that's not the fault of the fountain pen, that's me dropping it. But when the pen was perfect, it was 100% reliable. The fourth thing that I love about it is the design of the nib. You know, it's a little bit more unique, and the engraving that they've done on it, I think looks really nice. And the final thing that I love about this fountain pen's nib is the fact that it is a bouncy nib, in the sense that it has a lot of flex in it. Although it has a lot of flex in it without creating a lot of line variation. Now look, I love line variation as much as the next person, but I don't really care a whole lot about line variation when I'm trying to bang out 10 different pages of notes or 10 different pages of answers in an exam. What I do want though is a nib with some spring in it. That means it'll reduce the pressure on my wrist when I'm writing, and that's what this fountain pen does, and it does it amazingly. And that's probably one of the reasons why I was able to use this fountain pen for 3 or 4 hours without my wrist getting too tired. All in all, I really adore this nib. I love the way that it writes, and I find it a real shame that a lot of people are missing out on using this fountain pen. Now at $150, it's true, it is a lot for a fountain pen, but for an everyday writer that's going to last you 5, 10, 15 years, I think this is a great fountain pen to look at. And given the amount of used ones on eBay, it's probably not that difficult to go on and find a great deal for one of these fountain pens. If you can find one of these for maybe $70, $75, it is a great deal that I wouldn't pass up. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. And with that, let's get into the writing sample. Alright, welcome to the writing sample for the Parker Sonnet. I believe this is a 2015-2014 era pen. The nib that it has is a medium steel nib. And the ink that I'm using is one that I haven't used in quite a long time. This is called Ferris Wheel Press Tanzanite Sky. I think this is really nice blue-black ink, and I'm sure a lot of you would be getting bored of me using nothing but, you know, Parker Black all the time, so I thought I'd make a bit of a change. So, writing sample. It does skip a little bit. As I said before, that's me dropping the pen. That's not a problem of the pen. It doesn't normally do this, or at least it from the factory didn't. And apart from the skipping, that is as good as writing samples get, at least for me. I mean, this is a perfect pen. There's absolutely no, scratchiness to the nib. It's butter smooth, and as I said before, it bounces a lot. So writing with this is an absolute joy. Obviously, there is very little line variation in the writing. I mean, I can flex the pen. This is with no pressure, and this is with as much pressure as possible. And even though there is flex in the nib, there is almost no line variation whatsoever. No pressure, no pressure, and as much pressure as I dare push. There's also pretty much no line again. In fairness to the nib, this is the first time that I'm going to be using it with Rhodia. When I'm using normal uncoated paper, it doesn't tend to skip as much. But again, that's not the fault of the factory. That's me for dropping the nib. But this is the side strokes and this is the down strokes, and there isn't a whole lot of line variation in the grind of the nib itself. Now in terms of fast writing, I am not the fastest writer in the world. But when you need it to write fast, the feed can keep up. Speaking of which, when the pen actually does write properly, it is a pretty wet feed. With that said, you can definitely use this on uncoated paper without too much issue. Now in terms of reverse writing, it writes better than most of my European ground nibs in that it does tend to write okay reverse writing, but it's still a little bit scratchy, and in general I wouldn't reverse write ever. And that is about it for the Parker Sonnet. Obviously I know it did skip a little bit in this writing sample, but that's obviously my fault. If you can look past all that, what I have here is one of the best writing pens that I currently own. I own about 160, 170 different pens, and this one here, it definitely rises to the top. Easily top 5. This is obviously just an everyday writer pen. You wouldn't want to do this if you wanted to do, calligraphy or, fancy type of writing. But for everyday writing, the buttery smooth nib combined with the bounce that you get from the nib, and that is really one of the best parts of the nib, the bounce, means that this is one of my favorite pens to write with. If it wasn't, I wouldn't have used this in my high school exams. And with that, thank you very much for watching. As for the nib, I'll have to get that repaired sometime. Don't worry, I'll get it repaired soon, and hopefully I won't get those hard starts anymore. Cheers.